The alien general stared at the holographic display, his eyes narrowing as the map of Earth flickered before him. Red markers dotted the continents, each representing a failed invasion. The general's clawed hand tightened around the edge of the console, the metal groaning under the pressure. Every fleet, every weapon, crushed by those relentless humans, he muttered, his voice laced with frustration. Across the command deck, his officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen their leader angry before, but this was different. This was desperation. The general, a veteran of countless campaigns, had never encountered such a stubborn foe. Yet here they were, after years of war, no closer to subjugating this small, defiant planet. Prepare the fleet for a full-scale assault, the general barked. His decision was final. There would be no more half measures. This time, we will break them. On Earth, Captain Elias surveyed the horizon from the ruins of what was once a thriving city. The sky, once clear and blue, was now a haze of smoke and ash, shrouding the sun in a perpetual twilight. He adjusted his helmet, feeling the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. The comms crackled in his ear, a constant reminder of the chaos unfolding around him. "Captain, they're coming," a voice reported, tense with urgency. Elias nodded, though no one could see him. "Hold the line," he ordered, his voice calm despite the storm brewing in his chest. He had been in this position before, outnumbered, outgunned, but never outwilled. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but they had yet to break. And as long as he stood, they never would. The ground beneath his feet trembled as the first wave of alien ships descended from the sky, their engines roaring like thunder. Elias watched as the massive vessels blocked out the sun, casting long shadows over the devastated city. The invaders had grown bolder, more ruthless, in their attempts to crush Earth's resistance. But they still didn't understand the people they were fighting. Elias's hand hovered over the trigger of his rifle. He could see his squad around him, their faces grim but determined. These were soldiers who had seen the worst of the war, who had lost everything but still stood ready to fight. They were tired, battered, and scarred, but they were unbroken. "They think they can crush us," Elias said, his voice carrying over the squad's private channel. "But they don't know what it means to be human." The alien ships began to unleash their firepower, bright lances of energy tearing through the sky. Buildings crumbled, debris raining down like a deadly storm. Elias signaled his team, and they moved with practiced precision, taking cover behind what little remained of the city's defenses. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and the sharp tang of ozone. The sensory assault was overwhelming, but Elias remained focused, his mind sharp. "Remember why we fight," Elias said quietly. "For those who can't. For those who won't." The battle was on, and the odds were stacked against them. But Elias knew that humanity's strength wasn't in their numbers or their technology. It was in their spirit. The alien general could throw everything he had at them, but in the end, it wouldn't matter. Humanity would endure, as they always had. And as the first wave of alien forces clashed with Earth's defenders, Elias felt a familiar fire ignite within him. It was a fire that had burned since the war began, a fire that would never go out. Because no matter how dark the sky grew, no matter how many times the enemy attacked, there was one truth that the invaders would never understand. Humans never surrender. The remnants of Elias's squad huddled beneath the shattered remnants of a once grand skyscraper, the sounds of distant explosions rumbling through the ground. Dust hung in the air like a fine mist, catching the flickering light from the fires that dotted the landscape. The city was a war zone, a graveyard for the hopes of those who had once thrived here. Sergeant Ramirez glanced at Elias, his face smeared with grime and sweat. "They're pushing hard this time, Captain. It's like they're determined to grind us into the dirt." His voice was steady, but there was a note of exhaustion underlying the words, the kind that came from years of relentless combat. Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the alien dreadnoughts looming overhead. "They are," he replied, his tone calm despite the storm raging around them. "But they haven't broken us yet." The squad's radio crackled to life, and a panicked voice cut through the static. "This is Alpha Company. We're pinned down on the western front, multiple enemy contacts, heavy artillery. We need support now. Elias's jaw tightened. The western front was crucial to their defense. If it fell, the aliens would have a direct path to the command center. Ramirez, take half the squad and reinforce Alpha. I'll hold the line here with the rest. Ramirez hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching Elias's for reassurance. You sure about this, sir? Elias met his gaze evenly. We hold them here, or we lose everything. With a sharp nod, Ramirez rallied his team and sprinted into the smoke, their silhouettes quickly swallowed by the chaos. Elias watched them go, a mixture of pride and dread churning in his chest. Every decision weighed heavily on him, every order a potential death sentence for the men and women he'd fought alongside for years. But there was no room for doubt now. He turned his attention back to the battlefield, his senses sharpening as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The aliens were relentless, their tactics more aggressive than ever before. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers surged forward, their weapons tearing through Earth's defenses with ruthless precision. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and the distant screams of the wounded. Elias's heart pounded as he took aim and fired, his rifle bucking against his shoulder. Each shot was deliberate, each kill necessary to buy a few more seconds for his comrades. But even as he fought, a gnawing unease settled in the pit of his stomach. The aliens were adapting, learning from their previous failures. They were becoming more coordinated, more strategic. And the cost of resistance was rising with each passing moment. A brilliant flash of light illuminated the sky as an alien cruiser detonated in the distance, a testament to the ferocity of Earth's defenders. But for every victory, there was a loss, a life extinguished, a position overrun. Elias could feel the strain on his soldiers, their morale fraying under the relentless pressure. As the battle raged on, Elias's mind drifted to the civilians sheltered deep underground. They were the reason he fought, the innocents who had placed their trust in him and his soldiers. If they failed here, it wouldn't just be a military defeat, it would be the end of humanity's last hope. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. An alien war machine, towering above the ruins, emerged from the smoke, its massive cannons glowing with lethal energy. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he realized the enormity of the threat. This was it, the tipping point. Brace yourselves! Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. We stand or we fall! The war machine's cannons unleashed a barrage of energy, obliterating everything in its path. Elias dove for cover, his thoughts racing. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but not outmatched. Not yet. And as he readied himself for the onslaught, he knew that this battle, like every battle before it, would test the limits of their endurance. But no matter how dire the situation became, there was one thing the aliens still hadn't understood. Humans would rather die standing than live on their knees. The ground shuddered beneath Elias's boots as the alien war machine unleashed another devastating salvo, reducing the nearby buildings to twisted heaps of rubble. His squad was scattered, taking cover wherever they could find it, the air thick with dust and debris. The relentless assault seemed to stretch on forever, each blast a reminder of the enemy's overwhelming firepower. Elias crouched behind a chunk of fallen concrete, his breath ragged as he scanned the battlefield. The towering behemoth inched closer, its energy cannons glowing with lethal intent. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, the odds stacked so high that defeat seemed inevitable. But surrender was not an option. Not for him. Not for humanity. Sergeant Ramirez's voice crackled over the comms, strained but resolute. Captain, we're running out of options here. That thing's tearing us apart. We need a plan, and fast. Elias's mind raced, analyzing the situation. The war machine was an impenetrable fortress on legs, its armor designed to shrug off anything short of a nuclear strike. Standard weapons were useless against it. But then, standard tactics had never been humanity's strength. They'd always thrived on adaptability, on finding a way where none seemed to exist. Ramirez, listen closely. Elias replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. We're not going to outgun it, But we can outthink it. That thing's AI-driven, right? It's following a programmed pattern. We exploit that. Ramirez's response was immediate. What are you thinking, sir? Elias glanced around, his eyes settling on a half-collapsed skyscraper, its skeletal framework still standing tall amid the ruins. We lure it into a trap. Use the city against it. He relayed the plan quickly, his words precise and deliberate. The squad would split into two teams, one drawing the war machine's attention while the other rigged the skyscraper with explosives. It was risky, but if they timed it right, the collapsing building would bury the machine under tons of steel and concrete. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Understood, Captain, Ramirez said. We'll make it happen. Elias nodded, more to himself than anyone else, as he signaled the rest of the squad. All right, people, you know the plan. Stay sharp and stay alive. We've got one chance at this. The squad moved with grim efficiency, every soldier knowing the stakes. Elias led the decoy team, drawing the war machine's attention with concentrated fire. The alien behemoth lumbered forward, its cannons blazing as it pursued them through the streets. Every step it took brought it closer to the trap, the skyscraper looming ominously above. Team Bravo status? Elias called out as he ducked behind cover, narrowly avoiding a burst of plasma fire. Charges are set, Captain, Ramirez replied. Just give the word. Elias could see the machine now, its towering form casting a long shadow over the battlefield. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady as he prepared to give the order. Everything hinged on this moment. Now, Ramirez! Do it now! The world seemed to hold its breath as the explosives detonated, the roar of the blast deafening. The skyscraper groaned, its remaining supports giving way as it began to collapse in slow motion. Tons of steel and concrete crashed down onto the war machine, engulfing it in a cloud of dust and debris. For a moment there was silence, a tense, fragile silence. Then, a distant rumble echoed across the battlefield as the war machine's systems faltered, its energy cannons sputtering before going dark. The alien behemoth, once unstoppable, was now nothing more than a mangled wreck beneath the rubble. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing slightly. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the tide. But he knew this victory was only a small one in the grander scheme of things. The war was far from over, and the cost of every battle weighed heavily on his shoulders. As the dust began to settle, Elias's calms crackled with Ramirez's voice. Nice work, Captain. But I think we just woke up the whole damn hive. Elias allowed himself a brief, grim smile. Then let's give them something to remember. Elias's fingers drummed against the cold metal of his rifle, his gaze locked on the horizon. The enemy wasn't retreating, they were regrouping. The distant rumble of alien war machines, like a storm building in the distance, echoed across the ruins of the city. The victory they had earned minutes ago was fleeting, a brief pause before the storm struck again. And this time, they knew, it would be worse. We're not out of the woods yet, Captain. Ramirez's voice crackled over the comms, tense but steady. Elias nodded grimly, even though the sergeant couldn't see him. I know. We bought ourselves time, but not much. His squad was battered, their faces etched with exhaustion and resolve. They had been fighting for what felt like an eternity, each battle more desperate than the last. The city, once a thriving metropolis, was now a wasteland, its towering structures reduced to rubble. And yet, here they stood, humans, fragile in comparison to the forces arrayed against them, but unbroken. Captain! A voice cut through the static. It was Corporal Daniels, her tone urgent. Scanners are picking up something new. A massive energy signature heading our way. It's bigger than anything we've faced before. Elias's jaw tightened. The enemy wasn't just sending reinforcements. They were deploying their most powerful weapon yet. This was the final push, the one designed to crush them once and for all. Get me visuals, he ordered, his voice calm despite the knot tightening in his gut. The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a towering monstrosity of metal and energy, bristling with weapons that could level the entire district. It was more than a war machine, it was a harbinger of annihilation. The sight of it sent a ripple of dread through the squad, but Elias couldn't afford to falter. If they lost their nerve now, they were finished. "We've faced worse," he lied, knowing full well they hadn't. But lies could be a powerful tool, a shield against despair. Ramirez's voice came through again, determined. "Orders, Captain?" Elias surveyed the wreckage around them, his mind racing. They were outgunned and outmatched, but they had one advantage: their refusal to quit. The enemy didn't understand that, couldn't comprehend it. Humans were stubborn, resilient, and when cornered, dangerously creative. "We hold the line here," Elias said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We draw that thing into the city center. Use the terrain to our advantage. Make them fight us on our terms." There was no hesitation in the squad's response. They had followed Elias through hell and back, and they would do so again. It wasn't loyalty to him, it was loyalty to each other, to the idea that they were the last line of defense, that if they fell, there would be nothing left to protect. The ground trembled as the alien weapon advanced, its footfalls sending shockwaves through the streets. The squad took their positions, setting up ambush points, rigging explosives, preparing for a battle they knew they might not survive. Every movement was precise, deliberate, no wasted energy, no unnecessary words. Elias took a deep breath, his senses sharpening as the enemy came into view. The massive war machine loomed above them, its shadow swallowing the ruins. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the world holding its breath as human and alien forces stared each other down. Then, with a roar of engines and the flash of weapons fire, the final battle began. The squad fought with everything they had, pouring fire into the advancing behemoth, dodging its devastating attacks by the narrowest of margins. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt metal, the sounds of battle a deafening cacophony. But despite their best efforts, the war machine kept coming, shrugging off their attacks as if they were nothing more than insects. Elias felt the sting of despair creeping in, but he crushed it, focusing on the task at hand. This was what it meant to be human, to stand defiant in the face of impossible odds, to fight even when victory seemed out of reach. He had one last card to play, one final gamble. "Ramirez, Daniels, fall back to the secondary position," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "On my mark, detonate the charges." The war machine was nearly on top of them now, its cannons glowing with lethal energy. Elias waited until the last possible second, his heart pounding, then shouted, "Now!" The explosives detonated in a blinding flash, the shockwave ripping through the alien behemoth. For a brief, glorious moment it staggered, its systems overloaded by the blast. The squad seized the opportunity, unleashing everything they had left in a desperate assault. And slowly, impossibly, the machine began to falter, its armored hull cracking under the relentless barrage. With a final, ear-splitting screech, the alien war machine collapsed, its massive form crashing to the ground in a plume of dust and debris. The silence that followed was deafening, the city eerily still as the dust settled. Elias lowered his rifle, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. But as he looked around at the shattered remnants of the city, he knew this victory had come at a cost. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. "We'll rebuild," Ramirez said quietly, stepping up beside him. "We always do." Elias nodded, though he knew it would be a long, hard road ahead. But that was humanity's strength, they never stayed down for long. They had faced the darkness, and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. And they would keep fighting. For as long as it took, they would fight.